welcome back to our Book Talk segment of the program. Real pleasure right now to welcome a man on the show that has written a really great book about, of course, the chairman of the board. We're talking about Frank Sinatra, a man who knew him very well. He worked with him for a very long time, and the book is called Sinatra and Me in the Wee Small Hours, and Tony Oppedisano was Frank's road manager for many years, toward the end of his, I guess 10 or 15 years at the end of his performing life. Also worked with the great Don Rickles. We'll find out about that as well, but Tony joined us by telephone today from out in California. And Tony, it's great to see you, or to actually talk to you again. We met, as we were talking before we went on the air, back in, I think, 2004, when you and Dina Martin came through our area. So good to talk to you again.
Yeah, the pleasure is mine, Doug. I really I remember that. It was very gratifying that you had us on then, and I'm pleased and honored to have to be on the show again now.
We had you in. I did a talk show during the day, and I did a kind of a big band jazz show at night. And I remember you all came in the studio for 2 hours and playing a lot of Dean and Dina's music and Frank Sinatra, of course. And you're all dancing around the studio. I have pictures of that, so it was a lot of fun. And Les Brown Jr., he was in with us too, because Les was leading the band at Van Wezel when you came through Sarasota.
He was doing the tour with us, exactly, the inaugural tour of Dina's show that we put together. Absolutely.
Now, was that the first time? That was the first year that she was going out and doing like a tribute to her dad's show, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And it was something that she wanted to do, and she wasn't convinced that it would work. I said, "What, are you kidding?" I said, "First of all, you saw what we did. I had just produced a show similar for Lorna Luft.
All right.
Called Songs My Mother Taught Me." And I said, I could put a couple of duets together for you and Dad. I said, I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. And it worked. She's out doing it still.
I tell you, I'm sure you watch it too. She does the show on Friday afternoons on Facebook and YouTube, but it's unbelievable amount of views. She's like top of the charts of online views, so she's doing very well with that.
Yeah, she is. She ended up exactly where I figured she would.
Yeah,
and I'm happy for her.
Yeah, good to have her. Consider her not only a radio friend, but a personal friend as well. Nice people. So, and you as well. I mean, you're part of that now, and we're happy to talk. Before we get into the book, I got to tell you, I read through the book and I enjoyed it, but I did not know. I knew you're from New York, but I did not know that you grew up, at least part of your childhood, in Floral Park, is where I grew up. So good to talk to another Floral Park person.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I graduated from Sewanaka High School in Floral Park.
I was going to guess, because Floral Park Memorial was not around, I believe, when you lived there, so I'm guessing it was Sewanaka, so it was. Okay. Yeah.
Yep. Great school, great people.
Do you remember what street you lived on in Floral Park, if you don't mind saying?
I actually lived in Franklin Square.
Okay.
On Catherine Avenue.
Catherine, okay. Know the area pretty well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I grew up in Floral Park, just about a mile away from Belmont. I always have to tell people it's a mile away from Belmont, then they know where it is.
Yeah, well, when you remind them of the racetrack, then all of a sudden, exactly.
Yeah. For people to say, well, I sort of heard, but once you say Belmont, okay, we're on the border of Queens anyway, so, yeah. Well,
right.
Well, you don't meet too many people from Floral Park around. There's some famous people. I think John Williams, the great composer, I believe it's from Floral Park. Ray Heatherton, great radio and Broadway guy. I worked with him. So there are a few of us, or a few of yourselves. Now, I'm not putting myself in that category, but...
Yes, you are. You should be. You deserve it.
Well, let's start with the book a little bit. And again, it's called Sinatra and Me in the Wee Small Hours. As I mentioned in the intro, you met Frank in your early 20s in New York. You were a musician and a singer, and talk a little bit about that. We won't tell all the stories. We want people to buy the book, but you met him very early in your career, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I became aware of the club called Jilly's by listening to in my opinion, one of the greatest live albums ever to this day, Sinatra at the Sands with the Basie Orchestra.
Right.
And in that, during his monologue, kept talking about Jilly's and Jilly's and Jilly's. I said, when I'm old enough to start gigging in the city, I got to check it out. And I did, and befriended Jilly's older brother, Uncle Frank, who ran the place in Jilly's absence. And Jilly, for the people who are listening who may not be aware, Jilly Rizzo was pretty much the brother Sinatra never had.
Yeah.
They were that close. And long story short, Jilly put his arm around me and became a mentor. And he said, I think you'd be a good fit to meet the old man. And he was very careful who he did that with. And in December of 1972, he found the right occasion to put us together. And it turned out to be not only an introduction, he insisted that I sit in with the band and play that night for Frank, and we were there till almost 7 o'clock in the morning. And Frank actually sang a song with me, which almost caused me to drop the guitar, which is a whole other story. But we clicked, and Frank was in the middle of his self-imposed retirement, as he used to call it, where he stepped away from the industry for a bit to spend more time with family and friends. And then he told me in later years that another part of the reason was that he didn't feel that he might not be relevant to my generation. And by bringing me around, and I was invited to bring my friends around who were other musicians and singers, and these guys were all hanging on Frank's every word. So that coupled with boatloads of letters, from what I understand, at least come out of retirement and do an album, he felt, you know what, maybe I still have something to contribute. Came out of retirement in the fall of '73 and never looked back.
It's almost hard to believe, if you didn't read the history of Frank, that he would have felt that he was irrelevant because his records have always been around. He's always been on radio, at least since, I'm a little bit younger than you, but not that much. But I always heard him growing up as a kid. But I guess he felt with the rock and roll at the time, he just wasn't getting out there, right? Getting through.
That's exactly. He wasn't sure that his audience, the demographic was as large as it once was, and he's thinking, okay, so the 25 and unders are probably maybe half of them, if I'm lucky, are listening to me.
Right.
But he found out different, and like I said, he came out of retirement in '73, never looked back. And then when we did the duets album, one of the things that just absolutely thrilled him to death was he held up the paper at the Billboard, and he says to me, "I can't believe this. I'm almost 80 years old, and I knocked Pearl Jam out of first place."
I remember those. They came out early '90s, and Duets 1, and then, of course, Duets 2. And you talk about that in the book, how those were put together. And like you said, they almost, I'm not sure if top 40 stations played them. There wasn't any really top 40 then, but, they were played on not just jazz stations. They were played all over the place.
Across the board.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you look at the younger people that he had, and they were all thrilled to be duetting with him, and I'm glad that the record was the success that it turned out to be. We all anticipated that it would, and especially that it was the last thing that he ever recorded.
I don't know. Did he predate a little bit the Nat King Cole and Natalie Cole duet, or was that?
No, as a matter of fact, I kind of used that. I sensed that he was having some apprehension, and when we were discussing, he said, I just don't understand. He says, if I'm not going to be in the studio with the other artists, he said, how the hell is this going to work out? You can't recreate that chemistry, because up till then, any duet he ever did, whether it be on record with Keely Smith or live on television shows like with Dinah Shore and people. He liked to do things in the moment and have the orchestra surround him and have the other artist, right there in the studio at the same time. And I said, well, Frank, due to scheduling, people touring around the world, it's hard to have, everyone's schedule coincide where they could make it work that way. I said, in addition to that, a lot of the younger artists are not accustomed to recording the way you do. They go in and they lay down the rhythm tracks, and then they go in a week later and do the strings, and a week later and do the brass, and 3 weeks later they go into an isolation booth and lay down the vocal. I said, so when you get an artist that's accustomed to doing that, and they walk into legendary Studio A at Capitol Records and see that there's a 60-piece orchestra, and then they look across the room and see your face, I says, I literally said to him, you know what you're going to get? Dust is what you're going to get. So he laughed. I said, however, I said, if you recall, we were sitting by the pool down in Palm Springs, and we heard that great record with Natalie Cole doing Unforgettable. He said, oh, yeah, what a terrific record. I said, well, Frank, it's 1992. I said, how long has Nat been dead? And he looked at me puzzled, and then it registered. He said, oh, my God, if they could put her voice of a dead guy. I said, yeah. Uh-huh. I said, in addition to that, I said, the man who engineered that album, his name is Al Schmidt.
Right.
He says, yeah. I said, and Al Schmidt's engineering yours along with Phil Ramone. He says, oh, my God. So I said, it is very, very possible. And so it's ironic you bring that up, because that's what I used to help convince him that it was possible to do it.
Yeah, I know you talk about it in the book, and just from hearing interviews with him before, that he loved And really, the only way he wanted to do a record is if he kind of stood in the middle of the orchestra in the recording studio, and it was like a live performance in a sense. He did not like doing it, track by track.
No, and he was not a big fan of, punch in and fix that and punch in and fix that.
You do it again.
You did, exactly. If you can't do it in one take, you don't belong in the studio.
Right. I was just watching that documentary. You can watch it on YouTube. The one CBS did, I think it was 65, where they show a lot of them doing a recording session, and you get a sense of that in that documentary.
Yeah, and he actually used to invite people so that he had a little bit of a gallery, so that it was almost as though he was singing to an audience sometimes as well.
You would think somebody as much a perfectionist as Frank wouldn't want people there kind of distracting him, but he kind of thrived on that, didn't he? Wanting people around to listen to him, friends.
He really did.
Yeah, he
really did, and he respected his audience more than anything else in the world, and that's part of the reason that when he decided to walk away, he just felt that he wasn't living up to his own standard of professionalism, and he said, "My audience deserves better than that. That's who paid the freight to get me wherever it is that I am." And I want to walk away while I'm still doing a job that I can be proud of.
Talking with Tony Oppedisano, better known to his friends as Tony O, and the name of the book is Sinatra and Me in the Wee Small Hours, just out a few weeks ago, doing a very good business from what I understand. And let's kind of move ahead a little bit, Tony. You met Frank in the early 70s, and of course he came out of retirement. So what was the first time that he said, "Well, you want to go work for me"? That must have been interesting.
It was our history. Shortly after we met, I was continuing to play clubs in New York, but then that was beginning to wane. A lot of the great clubs were folding. Carson moved the Tonight Show to L.A., so I said, I got to go where the work is. So I came out to California in '76, and I maintained a friendship through Jilly. I didn't see him that frequently because I was on the road then as well, but we'd run into each other in Tahoe, or on a night off. If I was working in LA, I'd go up to Vegas. When I gave up my performing career in the early 80s because the music industry completely turned its back on the Great American Songbook and jazz and that kind of stuff, and unless you were an established artist, it was getting very difficult. So I started producing TV, and Jilly and I were doing more and more things together. And so it by osmosis, I was spending more and more time with Frank, especially down the desert. And then Jilly ended up having some legal issues, which caused him to not be able to go places and not be able to do certain things. And Frank would say, "Listen, if you're not busy such and such a time, how do you feel about coming with me and maybe, or meet me up in Vegas or whatever?" And that was mid to late 80s. And then when Jilly, unfortunately, was killed in that car crash, that's when it became kind of a permanent thing where Frank literally said to me, and we both lost probably one of the best friends we'll ever have in our life. And, it would be great if you and I could somehow figure out a way of working together. And so I put all my TV and other stuff aside and was on the road with him for the last 3 years of his performing career. From 92 to 95.
We'll get back to Frank a little bit, but was Jilly kind of a misunderstood person? You didn't really hear a lot of, great things about him from the media, and of course doesn't mean anything because the media can be wrong, as we know, but was he misunderstood?
Yeah, absolutely. They created a persona of Jilly that was 180 degrees from the man that I knew. He was a sort of an imposing figure physically.
Big guy, right? Tall guy.
But he was a tall guy, big, wide guy, but he was an absolute sweetheart, and not very book learned. However, Jilly could give a postgraduate dissertation on street smarts. He was a very, very bright. He used to say stuff that would crack us up. He would watch somebody make a complete fool of himself, and he would look at me. Here's a man who never made it past the 6th grade. He'd look at me and he'd say, Tone, I think common sense is the least common thing. I said, "You're absolutely right, Jilly."
Very, very profound.
Yeah, he was quite a character, and completely dedicated to his family, and like Frank, things that they had in common, and absolutely dedicated to his friendship with Frank. When he first befriended Frank, it was at a point in Frank's career where he, pardon the pun, couldn't get arrested.
Yeah.
I mean, he was down. Everyone had let him go. His
early
record
50s,
label
right?
dropped him. Early 50s. His record label dropped him. He had no representation, and his voice, he had a hemorrhage, and he wasn't able to sing for a good 8 months. And Jilly became his friend. And as Frank used to say, he said he was my friend, Frank, not Frank Sinatra.
Right.
There was no benefit in being Frank Sinatra's friend at that point. And that's why the friendship meant so much to him, because he knew he was there to be his pal, not looking for what Frank could do for him.
Yeah. Well, that's the same question, I guess, about Frank, because I think there's a huge misunderstanding a lot about Frank now. A lot of tumult and a lot of self-imposed things that he did. I mean, he admitted to it. But I think a lot of people have a misrepresentation of Frank Sinatra as a person, too, don't they? And your book kind of clears that up.
That was one of the goals in writing the book, was to pull back the curtain and give the world an opportunity to take a look at the man that I knew, and I had the privilege to know. He was just a regular guy, very personable, very, very caring, very, very generous, philanthropic, and dedicated father. And he was just, like he said, everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time, including me. And he was a really down-to-earth man with great familial values.
Yeah, and you talk about it in the book, too. I didn't realize the difficult birth that he had. I mean, his mother, I guess, very small woman, and he was a large baby. I didn't realize that till I read your book,
yeah.
and that may have had something to do with some behavioral things later on, right?
That's what the doctors had said in later years as well, and because they took him out of his mother. They had to use forceps,
right.
And it tore up the side of his head. It tore half of his earlobe off the left ear. It tore his neck. And he wore those scars very proudly until the late 70s, where Barbara finally convinced him to have some plastic surgery.
Yeah.
And but if it wasn't for his grandmother, as he said, they put me aside and were trying to save my mom. My grandmother picked me up, stuck me under some cold water, and slapped me around.
That's right, yeah. It's amazing when you think, very rare at the time of any family, particularly an Italian family. He's an only child. I guess obviously the mother couldn't have any more kids, but it's interesting.
Yeah, that had something to do with it. In addition, his mom and dad were very busy people. I mean, not in addition to her being a midwife, she was also a Democratic ward boss,
right?
And was doing a lot. And his dad, in addition to being a captain in the fire department, also owned a bar.
Yeah. And
so, and that contributed to Frank liking to stay up late, and part of the reason that he and I got to be so close, and he shared so many things with me, because he and I would stay up drinking till 6, 7. Sometimes we'd watch the sun come up. But it all had to do, it stemmed back from his childhood, when he said the three of them would be having dinner. He says, and I would pray the phone wouldn't ring, because I knew that one or both of them was going to be leaving probably for the rest of the night, and I'd be all alone.
Yeah, I've heard that over the years. And again, you talk about it in the book, being an only child. He hated being by himself. He did not enjoy that at all, right? That's why he always wanted to have late night evenings with people, friends, one or two or many, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that's why, as I like to say, on the road after the show, almost every night was like New Year's Eve. 12 or 14 people for dinner. But then again, as I said, one by one, people would peel off and wander away. They'd use an excuse they were going to the bathroom or something and never come back.
Well, I know Dean didn't really like doing that. Didn't Dean, he wanted to get up early and play golf, so he didn't like to stay up late with Frank.
Exactly. Dean did that, as a matter of fact, at one of his own anniversary parties. I don't know if you know the story or not. Well, he was married to Jeannie, his last wife. Jeannie, not his last wife, his next to last. He tried to remarry Jeannie after he divorced.
I heard that. Yeah, they never did. They were going to get, in an interview, he said they were going to get remarried, but they never did.
Yeah, she couldn't bring herself to do it, but they were as close as though they were married again. But at any rate, they had a big party at their home in Bel Air. They tented the tennis court, and they had an orchestra and the whole thing, and, white glove service and all of that stuff. And Frank and I wandered away so Frank could have a cigarette. And all of a sudden we saw police cars pulling up in front of the house. And Frank said, "What the hell is that?" So he walks out front, and Sergeant's walking up the walk, and he said, "Sergeant, what's going on?" He said, "Well, Mr. Sinatra," he says, "I hate to tell you this," he said, "but we got a call disturbing the peace." And Frank said, "Who the hell would make a call on this house at disturbing the peace?" At any rate, he got around to talking privately with the sergeant, and the sergeant says, "Well, I hate to tell you, Mr. Sinatra, but the call came from inside the house." So Frank said, "Oh, my God. Okay, thanks, Sergeant." So the sergeant walks away, and he walks up to Dean's room, and Dean is laying on the couch on his bed with the golf club on his shoulder, watching the late news in his pajamas already, and it's like 20 after 11. And Frank walks in, and Dean turns around and says, "Hey, Pally." Frank says, "I'll give you, hey, Pally. What the hell did you do?" And Dean says, "Hey, they ate, they drank. Let them go home. I got to get up and play golf in the morning." He called the police on his own party.
That's great. Now, they got along pretty well. I mean, I know there were some stories at the end when they were doing that last tour that they may have had a rift, but what do you know about that?
Actually, it was more along the lines of Frank and Sam were trying to get Dean out of the funk that he fell into, when Dino was killed.
Right.
And so they convinced him to do the Together Again tour. He really didn't want to do it. And then being on stage, he didn't feel like he had the energy level that matched Sammy and Frank, and he felt like he wasn't pulling his weight. And so he I think it was like the fifth show they were in Chicago, and he said, "Listen, I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go back to L.A. and I'm going to check into the hospital. I'm not feeling so good," and that's what he did. But one of the things that have been perpetuated is that they never spoke again. They were very close. They remained very close. As a matter of fact, I had the privilege of putting Frank on the phone with Dean about 14 hours before he passed away.
Oh, right.
And we would have dinner together occasionally in Beverly Hills. So they did continue to stay in touch. They were like brothers, the three of them.
Yeah.
Nothing was going to come between them. No.
Although Dean was a much more introverted person, from what I've heard and talking to Dean, and Frank was more of an extroverted, so there was that difference, right?
Yeah, Dean was he was always a loner, and he liked to stay home and watch westerns.
Yeah, right. I've heard that.
Just the way he was.
Yeah.
He wasn't part of that ring-a-ding-ding world, especially in his older years.
Yeah,
but he
had worked so much. I mean, you can't blame Dean for saying, "Hey, I've had enough." I mean, he worked a ton, so it's not like he made it look so easy. And Dina talks about that people think he was lazy, but he was not.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was all an act, and he was terrific at, even with the booze. Martinelli's apple juice went a long way in his glass.
Yeah, Dean didn't drink to the extent that he joked about it. He'd have a drink, I guess, after a show or maybe two, but he was not always drunk.
No, he started drinking. I guess the heaviest was
after his son passed. I know he went to that restaurant every night, didn't he? An Italian restaurant someplace. And
he
by
went
himself.
There was La Familia. Then when La Familia went away, then he had a booth at Da Vinci's, which is the last place we had dinner together. Myself, Frank, Dean, and his manager Mort Viner had dinner together. Mm-hmm. This is about a year before Dean passed away. We had dinner together at Da Vinci's. Yeah.
Could you ever feel relaxed, Tony? I mean, obviously you knew him well and you worked with him, but you look over across the table and Frank and Dean and Sammy when he was alive. I'm sure you all three ate dinner at that time as well. Can you feel, hey, part of the gang, or do you always feel a little intimidated?
I spent a fair amount of time in the company of Sam and the company of Dean. Rarely the three of them, because I wasn't on the Together Again tour at that point, because I was still heavily producing TV at the time. But I was in their company. But it's funny. I was in the company of so many huge personalities on a regular basis, especially at Frank's home, both in the desert, Beverly Hills, and at the beach. Almost every time there'd be Gregory Peck and Kirk Douglas and Jack Lemmon and Larry Gelbart, George Slaughter, Sophia Loren, Angie Dickinson. They were regulars at the house. Dick and Dolly Martin.
Right.
Every once in a while, I would have to pinch myself and say, "Look at this. Gregory Peck is telling me a joke. I can't believe it."
I guess after a while, it's like anything. what I do in radio, you get to meet these people, and after a while you realize they're just people like anybody else, and you put the celebrity away. You just talk to them like regular. I guess that's how you approached it, right? They're just people.
Yeah, and again, it was very gratifying to be
sure.
in that sphere, Sidney Poitier and people like that, and be accepted and embraced by those people.
Right.
It's funny. Yeah, it's mind-boggling when I look back at it now, and but again, we didn't have cell phones that you could take a picture back then.
Right.
and the last thing you wanted to do was be a civilian and pull out a camera at a party like that.
Oh, sure. I think those were better times. I don't think we need all the cell phone. Even though it's a great technology, I think it's too much, but what are you going to tell?
I kind of agree with you. Yeah.
Tony, if you don't mind, we go over a little bit. I want to get into a little bit of work. You work with Don Rickles as well. Of course, Tony was the road manager for Don for several years, and that's how I met Tony, of course, working with Dina, and also with Don Rickles coming through our area here in Florida. How did you get with Don? I know Don and Frank were friends. Was that how you met?
Well, Don and I actually met in 1980 at Harrah's in Lake Tahoe. We were both under contract there as performers, and he was working, as he used to like to put it, in the big room with people like Sister Sledge and a very young Patti LaBelle.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a quintet and was working in the State Line Cabaret, and went in to see his show on my night off. And if you remember, towards the end of the show, he always used to introduce people in the audience.
Sure, right.
And
I love that. Yeah. Old school.
Well, the entertainment director evidently slipped him my name, and he said, listen, he's under contract here, and we're trying to help his career, so he's going to be in the house tonight. Introduce him. And he looked down at the paper, and he says, and we have a young man in the audience, ladies and gentlemen. He says he's under contract here at Harrah's in Lake Tahoe. And he says, where are you, Tony? And he's looking at the name, and he's struggling with it. I swear to God. He says, Tony, how do you pronounce this? Hop in the sauna? How do you pronounce this? So that's how we met. We became friends, especially at that point when he heard that I already knew Frank and Jilly. We became friends. And in the early 1990s, when the Desert Inn was becoming the Stars Desert Inn, and they were going to have a huge bash for Frank's 77th birthday, capitalizing on the 2 sevens.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk Kerkorian at the time owned the place and was flying up a plane load of celebrities and bringing in every magazine, television show to cover this big event. And the subject came up, who do you want to have on the bill with you? And he said, I don't need polite laughter. I want someone who's going to create some tumult. And he thought for a long minute, and he said to me, how about Bullethead? And that was one of his loving names for Don, Bullethead. So through some various machinations, because Don was under contract at a different hotel, but the hotel was looking to close their showroom, a deal was struck, and he ended up opening for Frank, and that was his inaugural engagement. They signed him, Burton Cohen ended up signing him to be part of the personnel at the Desert Inn.
Oh, great.
And so shortly thereafter, his manager, Joe Scandori, had passed away a couple of months before all of this happened. And so he said, listen, I know, you're working with Frank. He said, but if you could see your way clear, I'd love to have you working with me. And I was working with a gentleman who lived down in Florida at the time, and we decided to work with Don together. And maybe 7 years or so before he passed away, Don saw fit to make me his exclusive personal manager. So I went from road manager to being manager.
Great.
Yeah. So that's the way it
And I think the audience will be interested to know exactly what does a road manager do. I guess you do a little bit of everything, right? Just make sure the gig goes through okay.
You massage the gig until it's palatable to the entertainer, and then you make the presentation, and then you do all of the pre-work on the phone, and basically produce the show.
Yeah.
And then and you're physically there with them on the road, day and night, and listen. In my opinion, it's a great gig because you know every single job that it takes to do that show.
Right.
So you could fill in for any number of the personnel that had to. And you control the show. you literally control the show. I got to the point where I was even doing Don's stage announcements because I wanted to make sure that he was indeed ready to go on the stage when they announced him, because that happened one time. He didn't even have his pants on yet, and we're in the dressing room here. And now, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, you're part of a great documentary, and also one you did on Frank. We can talk about that for a minute as well. But you're in it, and they show you doing the stage announcement for Don.
Yeah, and as I said, I did that just for protection. I said, this way they're not going to start the show without. Because Frank used to say that. He says, "Don't worry, they can't start the show without him."
That's right.
I said, "Well, now they can't."
I tell you, as a kid, again, growing up in New York, and once you're old enough to stay up and watch the Tonight Show, usually Friday nights, and you knew Don Rickles was going to be on, it was unbelievable what that man did. He was the greatest talk show guest. Forget about the live stage; that was great too. But the greatest talk show guest was Don Rickles. There's no doubt about it.
You never knew what he was going to do, and he didn't either.
No,
that was the beauty of it. Things would come into his head, out of his mouth, and completely gone. He had no recollection of whatever. It was just,
and it always worked. I mean, Johnny let him go off, and whatever talk show he was on, Merv, Mike, whatever, and he knew how to do it. I mean, you loved him because he was saying these things, but it was funny. He never felt like it was an insult.
No, and that was the thing. He said, "People know my heart." I never, no matter what I say, no matter how I say it, it never comes off mean-spirited, and
never.
People know that.
No. Always. Because he looked kind of cartoonish himself, so that helped.
Absolutely. And he picked on himself as much as he picked on everyone else.
Yeah.
Didn't hurt.
Yeah, I saw him, I guess, once or twice at Westbury Music Fair. I know you know that theater quite well in Long Island, and a few times down here. And, he was not a young man when I saw him his last show. But boy, he just still delivered with knockout punches, and people may have been surprised he would sing in his act, and not too bad either.
No, he felt that it had to be an equally balanced show. He said a show. Yeah. That's why towards the end of his career in Vegas, I mean, he was one of the few comedians that still had a full orchestra on stage with him.
Right.
Who did that? Very few people did that.
He always do the "I'm a Nice Guy" number, and then he did. He always did a tribute to Jimmy Cagney. I remember that. That was kind of interesting.
Yep.
And then, of course, the ending song was very kind of poignant, like old school showbiz, but it was great.
Well, yeah, I'll trade you laughter for love.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, he was quite a guy.
An
American original. He was to comedy what Frank was to music, in my opinion.
No doubt.
An American original.
Forged out of Long Island. Astoria, Long Island, I believe. Or Jackson Heights, I think is where he's
Jackson
from.
Heights.
Yeah,
Jackson Heights.
Something about being from New York, Tony. I think it gives us something.
It's a great foundation.
Gives us a defense mechanism, if nothing else.
That too.
Well, we'll wrap it up with Tony because we don't want to keep him too long, although we could talk for hours on Frank and Don Rickles. But the name of the book is Sinatra and Me and the Wee Small Hours, just out. And Tony, I guess it's available obviously everywhere. Any particular website you want to direct people to, or just the regular book sites?
I guess predominantly, the regular websites, predominantly Amazon.
Okay.
It's again very gratifying that it's doing so well, and I'm glad that people are finally getting to get a glimpse and an understanding of the man that I was privileged to know.
Well, there's been so many books written about Frank, and most of them probably wrong. I mean, you knew him so well, you couldn't write a book about him that wasn't accurate, I don't think.
And that's what I promised him I would do.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that it's being so well received. He would be very pleased.
Tony, great to, again, chat with you again. I know it was about 17 years ago, but we will not make it that long again. And I guess things are opening up now. Are you going to be doing any work with Dina or anybody, or are you just kind of retired now?
No, I turned my sights back onto full-time producing. I have a couple of shows in the pipeline. I've got 2 feature films, and one of them being a documentary that I'm doing. Right now, the working title is Rickles and Newhart, a Hollywood romance.
Oh, great! Yeah, great friendship they had. Yeah, that'll be fun.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate the offer to come on the show, Doug. It's great talking with you as usual.